Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The helicopter bucked hard against the wind, a tin can in a storm. Inside, a small gray-haired woman sat perfectly still. She looked out of place, swallowed by the oversized parka of a field-issue uniform, its sleeves brushing her wrists like borrowed time. Her hands, wrinkled and marked with faint scars, rested neatly on her knees. There was something in the way she sat, not fear, not nervousness, but a kind of practiced stillness. The kind of calm that doesn't need to prove itself. Across from her, a squad of young rangers shouted jokes over the rotor wash. Their laughter cut through the noise, brittle, confident, alive. The kind of laughter that hides exhaustion or arrogance or both. One of them, a sergeant with a jaw like a hatchet, caught her watching. He grinned. "First time this high up, ma'am," he yelled, his voice slicing through the noise. "Don't worry, the landing's the fun part." She didn't answer, just gave a polite, non-committal nod, a quiet acknowledgement and nothing more. Outside, jagged peaks clawed at a bruised purple sky, the Hindu Kush, mountains that chewed up men and machines with the same indifference. The woman, Lara Vance, watched them like one might watch an old adversary. She had mapped these ridges before, not with satellites but with blood and memory. The helicopter dropped suddenly, her stomach rising to her throat. No one noticed she didn't flinch. As the skids touched down, the wind howled across the plateau, a freezing physical force that seemed to hate everything human. They called this place Fob Nightingale, a cluster of sand-colored tents and prefabricated shelters, ringed with razor wire and steel barriers. From above, it looked like a scar. Up close, it felt like a wound. The ramp lowered. The young soldiers filed out, efficient, controlled, confident in their strength. Lara followed, her steps slow, measured. She favored her left leg slightly, a limp she carried like a secret, old and uncomplaining. A corporal jogged up, breath steaming in the frigid air. "You the logistics auditor from CENTCOM." He didn't wait for her answer. "Colonel Thorne, expecting you. Command tent, that big one. Try not to get blown away." He smirked. The sergeant beside him chuckled. The others barely looked. She adjusted the strap of her canvas duffel, eyes moving past them, scanning the perimeter. To them it looked like she was lost, a bureaucrat out of place. But her gaze wasn't random. It was deliberate, analytical. She noted the interlocking arcs of the machine gun nests, the exposed fuel bladders beside the ammo dump, a rookie's convenience mistake. And there on the western ridge she saw the blind spot, a shadowed approach path masked from their sensors by the mountain's spine. The soldiers saw an old woman. She saw a dozen ways they could die. She walked toward the command tent, her boots crunching over frozen gravel. Each sound was swallowed by the wind. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of coffee, sweat, and old electronics. A dozen maps were pinned down by ammunition cans, edges curling from the dry heat of generators. At the center stood Colonel Marcus Thorne, early 40s, hard posture and eyes that never stopped moving. He looked up briefly when she entered. One glance up and down, cataloging her. Civilian, gray hair, limp. "Vance," his tone was clipped. "You're late." "The pilot was thorough, Colonel," she replied evenly. "He preferred a safe landing to a punctual one." He grunted, not a laugh, just a noise. "That your gear?" He pointed toward her duffel. "Put it in the corner. You'll be working from that table. All the manifests, requisitions, and supply records are there. I need your audit done by 800 Friday. Chop her out then. I want your report on it." He didn't look at her again. Dismissed her with a turn of his shoulder, back to his maps. Lara didn't move to the corner. She walked to the central table instead. Her eyes traced the red markers scattered across the topographical lines. Something was wrong. "Your forward listening post, Op Juliet, it's exposed," she said quietly. Thorne frowned without turning. "Excuse me." "The seasonal winds," she continued, her voice calm, unhurried. "They shift through the valley by nightfall. Sound will carry from the east, not the west. They won't hear an approach through the Zabar Pass." Thorne straightened slowly, his head turning, irritation flickering across his face. That pass is impassable. Our intel confirms it. The people who live here, she said softly, don't read the same intel reports, Colonel. His jaw tightened. He stepped closer, looming. Let me be clear, Ms. Vance. You're here to count bullets and blankets. I'm here to deploy them. You will not question my command, and you will stay out of the way of those who are actually fighting this war. Am I understood? Her gaze didn't waver. Perfectly, Colonel. She turned, walked to the small corner table, and sat. He thought he'd won that exchange, authority reaffirmed. But the sadness in her eyes wasn't defeat. It was something else, the weary recognition of a pattern she'd seen too many times before. The tent hummed with quiet tension. Outside, the wind began to rise. Hours passed. She worked methodically through paperwork and inventories, but her ears were tuned to the rhythm of the camp, boots on gravel, the distant cough of a diesel generator, the faint whistle of wind through steel wire. It was the language of a base she was already reading better than its commander. Then near evening, she felt it, that subtle, instinctive shift in the air pressure before a storm. She set down her pen and looked toward the tent flap. Snow had started to fall, not flakes, but sharp ice dust carried on a rising gale. It came fast. The storm didn't arrive gradually, it materialized. One moment the world outside was gray, the next white, blinding, all-consuming. The wind screamed, tearing through the camp like a living thing. Visibility, zero, communications, unreliable, and somewhere beyond that veil of snow, movement. A tremor ran through the ground, a dull, heavy thump, then another. Explosion. The west perimeter, the one she had warned about. Inside the command tent, the lights flickered, then died. Red emergency strobes bathed the room in an eerie pulse. Thorne was shouting orders, voice barely audible over the storm. Get me comms. Sitrep. I want all sectors reporting, now. No one answered. The comms tent was gone, hit by a mortar round. The young operator lay motionless on the ground, a black stain spreading across his chest. Gunfire erupted from the perimeter, sharp, frantic bursts drowned in wind. It wasn't random. It was coordinated, surgical. Thorne grabbed his rifle. Rally on me, he barked, storming into the whiteout. The move of a lieutenant, not a colonel, instinct over strategy. He ran toward the chaos, toward the sound of gunfire, trying to plug a dam that was already bursting. Lara stayed. She dropped to her knees, calm amid the storm. While others saw confusion, she saw a pattern forming in real time. Mortars first, communications down, power next. Flanking fire from multiple vectors. It wasn't a siege. It was dissection. They were cutting the fob apart piece by piece. Her mind moved fast. If they'd studied the base, if they knew its weak points, they'd be heading somewhere specific. Not the barracks, not the command tent, the logistics depot. She stood, limp and all, and crossed the tent, her voice steady. Captain, with me. Captain Ives, pale, shaking, looked up from a half-broken field radio. We're cut off. Antennas down, repeaters dead. Not completely, she said. She knelt beside the destroyed console, fingers already tracing the torn cables. A coaxial line, half buried in snow and debris. She followed it, old seismic sensor wiring, copper-based, independent power. Still live. She pulled a small toolkit from her belt pouch. The young officer blinked. What the hell? Giving you a voice again, Captain, she said, since your colonel lost his. Wire strippers, crimpers, bare hands in freezing air, sparks, then a crackle, a voice through static. This is Vance, she said. Report. Who is this? A young soldier's voice stammered through the speaker. We're taking heavy fire at the south gate. They're not breaching, she replied firmly. They're fixing you in place. Report fire direction and volume. The soldier hesitated, then complied. The calm authority in her tone cut through panic like steel. As she spoke, her hand moved, drawing on a damaged map with a grease pencil, sketching the attack vectors. The pattern emerged. Every assault line converged on one place, the supply yard. "They're not here to take the base," she murmured. "They're here to steal its heart. The depot, the fuel, the medicine, the winter lifeline." Outside, gunfire raged. The blizzard screamed. And in the center of it all, an old woman who wasn't supposed to be there was already saving everyone. But no one yet knew who she really was. Not the colonel, not the men who mocked her confidence. Not even the terrified soldiers who clung to her voice in the dark. There was something she hadn't told them. Not yet. How could a woman who wasn't even supposed to be there know what the soldiers did? Snow hammered the base like artillery. Every sound was muffled by the storm, every movement distorted by the white haze. Visibility was less than 10 feet. What should have been an orderly defense had turned into blind survival, men firing at ghosts, shouting names swallowed by the wind. And in the middle of it, Lara Vance, the woman they thought was just an auditor, was kneeling beside a shattered radio array, breathing slow, eyes sharp, her hands moving with purpose. The young private on the other end of the crude circuit stammered through static. "They're everywhere, ma'am. We're losing the wall." Her tone never changed. Calm, unflinching. "Hold your position. Focus fire northwest, elevation 20. They're trying to draw you out, don't take the bait." Then to herself, barely above a whisper, "They're herding you away from something." Captain Ives was crouched beside her, face pale, knuckles white around his rifle. "We can't hold this, Miss Vance. We've got no eyes, no comms, no—" "We have this," she interrupted, holding up a grease-smudged map. "And we have time, not much but enough." He blinked. "Time for what?" "To stop guessing." Outside, another explosion rolled through the storm, closer this time. The ground trembled, the tent's poles groaned. The generator had been hit. The lights flickered, then died completely. The tent was swallowed in red glow and moving shadows. She didn't flinch. "Where's your backup power?" Ives pointed to the floor. "Under the table, manual crank, low yield. Won't last 10 minutes. "That's 10 minutes more than we had." She turned back to the wiring, calm, deliberate, and began rerouting power to the jury-rigged intercom. Sparks hissed. The smell of burning insulation filled the air. Then a voice crackled through, faint, terrified, real. "Southgate, heavy fire, they're cutting through the wire." Lara snatched the receiver. "Negative, they're not breaching, they're fixing you in place. Keep them engaged but low volume, I repeat, low volume. Conserve your ammunition, help is coming." Her words landed like lifelines through static. Orders, simple and clear, the kind that could pierce through fear. In another corner of the tent, Colonel Thorne stormed back in, half covered in frost and fury. His face was raw, eyes wide with adrenaline. "What the hell are you doing?" he barked. "You're a damn auditor, not—" She looked up. "Colonel, your west perimeter is gone. The enemy's advancing through the supply yard in 5 minutes. You need to redeploy your teams now." He froze. "How do you—" "Because you're not under siege," she said. "You're being robbed." The air went still. The wind screamed outside, but inside, silence. Even the junior officers looked at her. She stood slowly, brushing dust off her hands. "They're targeting your fuel, your ammunition, your med kits. They can't sustain the winter without them. They're using the storm to mask their movement. You have one chance to stop them." Thorne's jaw worked, his ego battling the truth. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. And what he saw wasn't a bureaucrat. It was a soldier who had already been here before. "Fine," he snapped. "You want to give orders, then do it." Her tone didn't change. "Not orders, corrections." She grabbed a damaged whiteboard from the corner, wiped it clean with her sleeve, and began sketching positions, angles, choke points. Her handwriting was sharp, fast, precise. Every line told a story of how the next few minutes would go. "Reyes," she said into the handset, her voice low but cutting through static. "Status." Pinned down west wall, came the reply, breathless. 3 left, we're running dry. Look to your left, Sergeant, she said. 20 meters, you see a drainage culvert, covered by a steel grate. A pause. Jesus, yeah, I see it. It's not a culvert. It's an access tunnel, old generator conduit. Runs under the supply yard. You can use it to flank them. Reyes' voice was quiet disbelief. That tunnel's ancient, might collapse. Then move fast, she said. You'll be exposed for 5 seconds crossing the open ground. Go on my mark, I'll give you suppression. He laughed dryly through the noise. Suppression, with what? We're the only ones here. She turned her head toward the private near the tent flap. You, she said. Name. Harris, ma'am. Can you operate a mortar? He blinked, startled. Yes, ma'am, basic training. Good, she pointed to a corner of the map. 2 81mm tubes in the secondary arms locker. The machine gun pinning raise is right here. You'll fire 3 rounds, high explosive. You will not bracket. You will hit it first try. Understood. The boy stared, terrified, then focused. He nodded once. Understood. Go. He ran, stumbling into the storm, vanishing into the white. Lara turned back to the radio. Reyes, get ready. Seconds ticked like heartbeats. Then thump, thump, thump. The deep sound of mortar fire rolled through the base, followed by 3 explosions that shook the tent walls. The west gunfire faltered. Go, Reyes, she said. Now. Outside, 3 figures broke cover, vanishing into the white blur. She watched the seconds on her wristwatch pass, lips moving in silent count. 5 seconds, 6, 7. Then a voice through static. Inside, tunnels clear, moving. She exhaled, the first visible sign of relief. Copy that. Good hunting, Sergeant. The colonel stood frozen. The radio in his hand buzzed with chatter, his men responding not to his voice but to hers. Lara Vance moved through the tent like a conductor guiding a broken orchestra. She rerouted medics to the storage locker, safer than the exposed aid station. She had the mess hall sergeant stack flour bags and sugar sacks to reinforce a crumbling wall, dense enough to stop shrapnel. She ordered a non-essential pump reversed to flood a low-lying approach path, freezing mud in seconds, turning the ground itself into a weapon. Every command was logical, measured, perfectly placed. And for the first time since the attack began, the base stopped dying. The chaos began to shape itself into rhythm. Soldiers who'd been panicking minutes ago were now acting with precision, their movements coordinated by a calm, distant voice. Thorne stared at her, the woman who wasn't supposed to be here, the woman who had been right about everything, the one whose calmness bordered on unnatural. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer. She was already issuing the next order. The storm outside raged, but inside the command tent, something else was building, a strange, fragile kind of order. When the backup generator finally died, plunging them into total darkness, no one panicked. They waited for her voice. "Flashlights only," she said. "No flood lamps. They'll use the light for targeting. Keep your heads low and your hearts steady." She walked through the red-lit haze, the limp more noticeable now, her breath frosting in the cold air. But her eyes, those steady gray eyes, burned with focus. The next explosion hit the generator farm. Sparks showered through the night. Someone screamed. "Fall back to the inner perimeter," she ordered. "Use the damaged trucks for cover. Stack fuel drums behind the HESCO barriers. They're double-walled, they'll hold." Ives stared at her. "You've done this before." "Once or twice," she said softly. But the truth was heavier than that, much heavier. Because Lara Vance, the quiet woman they'd mocked, wasn't just an auditor. She wasn't even supposed to exist anymore. She buried that identity years ago, the one that lived in classified reports and whispered legends. The strategist who could turn a hopeless situation into victory. The mind that won wars without ever pulling a trigger. the name that command had buried under sealed orders and myth. Artemis. No one here knew it yet. But they would. And when they did, it would change everything. The storm screamed on a living, howling wall of ice. And in that storm, a gray-haired woman rewired a battlefield with her bare hands. She didn't shout, she didn't beg for control. She just earned it, one decision at a time. And for the first time that night, someone whispered through the static on the comms. She's not just logistics. Outside, Sergeant Reyes' muffled voice came through. West Yard secure. Repeat, West Yard secure. The tent fell silent for a heartbeat. Lara allowed herself a small nod. Good, hold that position. You just saved this base. Then quieter, almost to herself. For now, because she knew what was coming next, the enemy wouldn't stop. Not yet. They'd regroup, adjust, and come harder. They always did. She looked at the colonel, his face pale in the flickering red glow. They're not finished, she said, and neither are we. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. Not sky thunder, artillery echo. The second wave was coming. And the woman they'd ignored was ready for it. What did the command think they were hiding out here? An old auditor, or something more dangerous? The storm had dulled to a constant roar. Snow came sideways, biting through cracks in the tents. The base looked like a ghost settlement half buried in white. But in the center of that ruin, a pulse still beat, the voice that refused to surrender. Sector 4, report, Lara said into the crackling intercom. A brief pause then. Holding ma'am, ammo's low, visibility 2 meters. Conserve, fire only when you see movement. Copy that. Her tone never wavered, not once. Around her, the tent had turned into a war room of the old kind, manual maps, flashlights, and grease pencil lines spreading like veins across a table. Colonel Thorne stood opposite her, arms folded, face shadowed in red emergency light. The arrogance that once sharpened his words had bled away, replaced by something heavier, the dawning realization that he was no longer the one keeping this base alive. He wanted to say something, to reclaim authority, but what could he say to the woman who'd already done what he could? He tried anyway. Vance, whatever this is, you've got experience I've never seen. That comm setup, those orders. She didn't look up. Colonel, focus on the perimeter. You knew the layout of this place better than my engineers. His voice carried something between suspicion and awe. Who briefed you before you came here? Lara's pencil paused for half a second, then she kept drawing. No one. He frowned, then how? Because I helped design it, she said quietly. He blinked, thrown off balance. Before he could speak, the radio snapped with static. A distant voice shouted, movement on the east ridge, multiple heat signatures closing fast. Positions, Thorne barked, get ready. Lara cut him off. No, not East Ridge, that's a diversion, they'll hit from the north. How the hell could you know that? Because that's what I do. Her voice dropped lower, more deliberate. You'll lose the east if you split your defense. Pull 2nd platoon to the north fuel corridor. Now. Thorne hesitated, then nodded. The order went out. Minutes later, as if fate itself listened, the real attack came screaming in from the north. RPGs, small arms, a wall of noise and fire. The eastern ridge remained untouched. Thorne turned toward her, eyes wide. How did you? Pattern recognition, she said. Some ghosts don't forget their tricks. Outside, chaos reignited. The storm glowed orange from muzzle flashes. Men shouted. The heavy thump of mortars shook the ground. But Lara was stillness. Every movement precise, every word clipped. Reyes, shift right 15 meters, don't expose your flank. Harris, check your angle, you're firing too high. Adjust. Good. Hold fire till they breach the second barrier. Her voice cut through the storm like a scalpel through noise. Calm wasn't the right word anymore. It was control, quiet, absolute control. Then through the hiss of static, another voice broke through, different. distant. Command channel distorted but unmistakably official. Nightingale, this is Task Force Command. Do you copy? Nightingale, respond. Captain Ives lunged for the mic. Task Force, this is Fob Nightingale. We're under attack. Comms down, multiple casualties. Request immediate support. A pause, then a crackling answer. Support impossible, storm interference, you're on your own. Listen carefully, we have an asset on site. Is she secure? Thorne frowned. Asset. The voice sharpened, urgency cutting through distortion. Check your roster, civilian contractor. Vance, Lara Vance, confirm status. We need to speak with Artemis. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Artemis. Even the storm seemed to pause. Thorne's eyes darted to the woman by the map table. For the first time that night, Lara froze mid-motion, just for a fraction of a second. The colonel spoke carefully, voice tight. Task Force Command, say again. Artemis, the radio insisted, is she with you? Thorne stared at Lara. The name echoed in his mind, faint memories from classified briefings, half-whispered stories in war colleges and intelligence meetings. A myth more than a person, a strategist who turned unwinnable conflicts into victories decades ago, a phantom known for surgical precision, for rewriting the rules of asymmetric warfare. He'd read about her once, one line in a redacted report, wounded in action, presumed retired. General Artemis Vance, the voice crackled again. We need confirmation, the board is set, her move. Thorne lowered the mic slowly, his throat dry. He looked at her, this small, gray-haired woman in a borrowed parka, her fingers still stained with grease and blood. Ma'am, he whispered, who are you? Lara met his gaze. For a long moment she said nothing. The storm howled outside. The base shook under the weight of artillery, and then, quietly, I was supposed to stay gone. She turned away, eyes scanning the tactical map as if nothing had changed, but everything had. The soldiers in the tent stared at her now, not as a civilian, not as an auditor, but as something else entirely. The myth had just stepped into the room. The radio hissed again, frantic now. Colonel, do you understand? Find her. We need Artemis. Thorne swallowed hard, then lifted the mic. His voice shook. Task Force Command, Artemis is currently engaged. Static swallowed the response. When he turned back, Lara was already giving orders. Reyes, the convoy approaching your position, don't engage yet. They're baiting you into overextension. Let them pass the burned-out truck, then open fire. 3-round bursts. Conserve. Copy that. Thorne stood still, the rifle hanging forgotten in his hands. Around him, chaos continued, but he was somewhere else entirely, caught between disbelief and shame. He had dismissed her, mocked her, reduced her to spreadsheets and requisitions, and now the entire base was moving to her rhythm. He felt very small. The storm pressed harder against the tent, wind keening like a chorus of ghosts. Lara's voice remained level. We can't win through force. We win through rhythm, discipline, predict them faster than they can adapt. She grabbed a fresh sheet of paper and began drawing again. Arrows, circles, timing marks. Colonel, I need 2 fire teams to stage here and here. When they overextend into the depot, we close the line, cut off retreat. They'll panic. When they panic, they break formation. That's when you take back control. He nodded, still wordless. The authority in her voice made obedience feel inevitable. Minutes passed. The base became an instrument. Every defender moved in concert, guided by that unseen rhythm. The floodlit chaos turned into something sharper, colder, organized defiance. Sergeant Reyes' squad, moving through the underground conduit Lara had pointed out, emerged behind the main enemy element. They fired only 3 bursts, precise, lethal. The enemy's command team dropped before they even realized they'd been flanked. The rest followed in kind. The tide began to turn. By the time the horizon lightened to a pale gray, the gunfire had slowed. The screaming wind carried away the last echoes of combat. It was over. Not with a roar, but with silence. The survivors stood motionless, blinking through snow and smoke, not quite believing it. The enemy was gone, fled back into the white wasteland, dragging their wounded. Colonel Thorne stepped outside, his breath steaming. The base looked shattered, craters, torn fencing, the smell of gunpowder heavy in the air, but it was still standing. And every single soldier alive owed that to the woman now leaning over the map table, quietly marking supply shortages. He turned back toward her. His voice was barely audible. "You're Artemis." She didn't look up. "That name doesn't exist anymore." "Then what the hell are you doing here?" Her hand paused on the pencil, trying to make sure no one else has to remember it. The words landed like stones in a grave. She finished marking the last position, then straightened with a soft exhale. "You have wounded, Colonel. You'll need triage rotation and a line for evacuation once the storm clears. Your men will want to celebrate, but not yet. Count your dead first." He hesitated. "Ma'am, General." "Don't." Her tone was quiet, final. "That rank died years ago." Outside, the snow began to ease. Morning light seeped through the storm, soft and pale, revealing the scars of battle. Lara stepped out into it, her breath rising in small clouds. The soldiers who passed her didn't speak. They just nodded, eyes filled with something between awe and disbelief. She moved through them like a ghost, returning to old ground. Thorne followed at a distance, the wind tugging at his torn sleeve. The words of Task Force Command still echoed in his head. "The board is set. Her move." Now he understood. The woman they mocked, the one they ignored at the briefing table, had just rewritten the night. And for the first time in his career, Colonel Marcus Thorne felt the weight of humility settle into his bones. He looked across the ruined base toward the mountains, where the storm was finally breaking apart. Light touched the jagged peaks, bleeding gold across the snow. Behind him, the soldiers began to work again, clearing debris, helping the wounded, reloading what ammunition remained. The living doing what the living must always do: continue. Lara stood apart from them, silent, staring at the horizon. Her eyes were distant, not on the mountains, but beyond them. Some memory she couldn't shake, some battlefield buried years ago. The wind carried her whisper, almost lost in the cold. "Never again." Then she turned, picked up her duffel and walked back toward the command tent. There was still work to do. And though they didn't say it out loud, every soldier who saw her pass felt the same truth in their chest. They hadn't just been saved. They had been led. Why was silence louder than victory? The storm was gone. What remained was worse. Fob Nightingale stood half-buried under frost and ash, a landscape of torn fences, blackened craters, and wind-scoured debris. The mountains that had swallowed them whole were quiet again, watching like ancient witnesses. The battle had passed, but the silence it left behind carried the weight of everything that didn't. Lara Vance stood in the middle of it all, her parka zipped to her chin, her boots crunching through snow laced with ash. Around her, soldiers moved like ghosts, slow, methodical, too tired for words. They carried stretchers, stacked ammo boxes, wrapped bodies in tarp. No one shouted anymore. No one laughed. Victory here didn't look like glory. It looked like survival. Colonel Thorne limped toward her through the pale light of morning, his left arm in a sling, his uniform stained and torn. When he stopped beside her, he didn't speak right away. He just stood there, watching the soldiers who once mocked her now follow her quiet movements with reverence. She didn't notice them, or maybe she did but chose not to care. 37 wounded, she said quietly, her eyes scanning the base. 8 dead, 2 missing. You'll need to rotate medics in shifts. The triage team's been running on adrenaline for 12 hours straight. Thorne nodded slowly. Already done. Her voice softened just slightly. Good. They stood there, watching the sunrise burn pale gold over the peaks. Steam rose from the ground where snow met fire-warmed steel. Thorn broke the silence first. "I read about you once," he said, almost to himself. "Artemis, you were." She stopped him with a look. "Don't finish that sentence." He hesitated, searching for words. "They said you disappeared, that you retired after Toronto Valley. They said you walked away." Her gaze drifted toward the western ridge, where the storm had hit hardest. They were right. He frowned. "Then why come back? Why now?" For a long time she didn't answer. When she finally did, her voice was almost too soft for the wind to carry. "I didn't come back. I was sent to count crates." The simplicity of it hit harder than any explanation. She turned, beginning to walk toward the makeshift triage tent. Thorn followed. As they passed, soldiers straightened instinctively, not out of military reflex, out of respect, the kind that doesn't need orders. Inside the medical tent, heat radiated from portable lamps. The air smelled of blood, antiseptic, and diesel. Medics worked quietly, their faces drawn tight. Lara knelt beside a wounded corporal, a boy no older than 20. His arm was bound, his uniform soaked dark. His eyes fluttered open. "Stay still," she said gently, pressing a new dressing into place. "You'll live." He blinked at her. "You're the auditor." Her lips almost curved, something like that. The boy managed a weak laugh before passing out again. She finished wrapping the bandage, securing it with a strip of tape. Her hands didn't shake. Thorn watched from the entrance, saying nothing. He didn't understand how someone who had commanded entire campaigns could be so gentle with a single soldier. Later, when the worst of the wounded were stable, Lara stepped outside again. The sun was higher now, harsh and cold against the white. She found a half-frozen crate near the edge of camp and sat. For the first time since the storm began, she allowed herself to stop. Her gloves were stiff with dried blood and fuel. Her shoulders ached. Every breath cut through her lungs like glass. And yet there was no relief. Only that old, heavy stillness, the one that had followed her ever since the war she'd tried to forget. Her eyes drifted toward the mountain pass. Somewhere out there the enemy was regrouping. They'd be back. She knew that. She always knew. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." She turned. It was Sergeant Reyes, his helmet tucked under his arm, face lined with exhaustion and soot. His voice was hoarse, his eyes dark from lack of sleep. She nodded once. He stepped closer. "I was wrong about you." "Most people are," she said softly. He exhaled, almost a laugh, then looked at the ground. "When you told me about that tunnel, I thought you were crazy, but you saved us. You saved all of us." She shook her head. "I didn't save anyone. You did what soldiers always do. You held the line." Reyes stared at her for a long moment, then unclipped his canteen from his belt and held it out to her. "Last of my water," he said. "You earned it." Lara took it without ceremony, drank a small sip, and handed it back. No words, just a shared silence between two people who understood what couldn't be said. That gesture, small, wordless, was worth more than medals. When Reyes left, she stayed there, eyes fixed on the horizon. The sunlight had begun to break fully through the clouds now, painting the snow in soft gold. For a moment it looked peaceful, almost beautiful. But peace was never what she saw. She saw weak points, blind spots, lines of approach. Old habits never really died. Inside the command tent, Colonel Thorn was giving a situation report over the now-restored satellite link. His tone was different now, quieter, stripped of its earlier bravado. "We held," he said. "Minimal resources, high losses, but we held. Credit goes to Ms. Vance." The voice on the other end, a general, responded with relief, but also something heavier. "You mean General Vance," he said quietly. "Let her know command's aware. The board's clear. Her move again." Thorn's jaw tightened. She's not going to like that. He was right. When he stepped back outside, Lara was already walking the perimeter. Her limp was more pronounced now, but she didn't slow. Every time a soldier stopped to salute, she gave a single nod, nothing more. He caught up with her near the western wall. "They want to talk to you," he said. She didn't stop walking. "Tell them I don't take orders anymore." "They'll insist." "They always do." He hesitated. "You could come back, you know. Command, training division, advisory. They'd take you in a heartbeat." She turned her head slightly, her gray eyes cold but calm. "And do what? Teach men like you how to ignore women like me faster." Thorne looked away, embarrassed. "You proved your point." "No, Colonel," she said. "The mountain proved it. I just happened to be standing here when it did." They reached the northern barrier. Beyond it, endless snowfields shimmered under sunlight. She studied them for a long time, the wind brushing strands of gray hair across her face. "War doesn't end," she said quietly. "It just waits until we forget what it costs." Thorne opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing to add. For a long minute, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft hiss of wind through wire. Then faintly from the mess tent behind them came a small metallic clink. They turned. Corporal Davies, the young soldier who'd smirked when she first arrived, was walking toward her, a steaming mug in his hand. His arm was wrapped in a crude bandage. He stopped a few feet away, placed the mug on the crate beside her, and without saying a word walked away. Lara looked down at the mug. Steam rose gently into the cold air. Coffee, black, bitter, strong, exactly the way she liked it. She picked it up, wrapped her hands around the warmth, and took a slow sip. It tasted like the past. For a moment her eyes softened, but only for a moment. Behind her the soldiers worked in near silence. Some glanced her way just once before returning to their duties. No one mocked her now. No one questioned her presence. Respect, when it finally came, didn't arrive in applause or ceremony. It came quietly, wrapped in exhaustion and gratitude. Colonel Thorne watched her for a while, then finally spoke. "Ma'am." She turned her head slightly. He straightened his posture, pain flickering in his shoulder as he raised his hand to his brow. The salute he gave wasn't regulation sharp. It was deliberate, heavy, earnest, the kind reserved for someone you never thought you'd salute. "Thank you," he said simply. She didn't return the salute. She wasn't in uniform. But she gave him a small nod, just enough to acknowledge what couldn't be put into words. The wind carried the sound of metal scraping, boots crunching, quiet voices calling for tools. Life was slowly returning to the base. Lara turned her face toward the rising sun. Its warmth touched the frost still clinging to her parka, and for an instant she looked almost peaceful, like someone standing on the edge between two worlds, the one she'd tried to leave and the one that refused to let her go. The battle was over. The audit still waited. And in her eyes, behind the calm, a single thought echoed like a closing prayer. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. How do you retire from the part of yourself that refuses to die? By noon, the storm was gone. The wind still whispered through the mountains, but the sky had cleared, a piercing, cruel blue stretching above a world of white scars. Fob Nightingale looked almost peaceful now. From a distance, you could mistake it for calm. Up close, it was exhaustion pretending to be order. Lara Vance walked through the wreckage of the supply yard, where the attack had first struck, where she'd predicted it would strike. The ground was a frozen mosaic of shell craters and blackened snow. She moved slowly, not from age but from caution, every step deliberate, every sound absorbed by the cold. In her hand she carried a clipboard, an old habit. Numbers steadied her. Damage reports, casualty lists, remaining rations. It was how she brought structure to chaos. Numbers didn't bleed. Numbers didn't scream. But sometimes they lied. Behind her, Colonel Thorne's voice called out over the crunch of boots. "You're really doing it. An actual audit." She didn't turn. Someone has to. You just saved this base, and you're counting boxes. Exactly, she said. If I stop doing the small things, I start thinking about the big ones, and that's when ghosts show up. He didn't ask which ghosts, he could hear them too. They stopped beside a ruined storage container, half collapsed under the weight of snow. The side was scorched black. Inside, twisted steel drums gleamed faintly. Fuel, a loss, she said. You'll need a resupply within 72 hours. Thorne rubbed his jaw. Command will have to clear that, once the comms stabilize. They already did, she said without looking up. He frowned. What do you mean? She tapped the earpiece tucked beneath her hood. They've been talking to me all morning. He hesitated. Command, you answered. Briefly. Thorne's expression darkened, and they want me back. She said it simply, like someone reading a weather report, detached, inevitable. Thorne studied her face, the stillness, the restraint. Are you going to say yes? She didn't reply. Instead, she crouched beside the fuel drum, tracing a finger along a bullet groove. They don't need me, she said finally. They need a name. Artemis was never a person to them, just a solution they could pull out of storage when everything else fails. Thorne said nothing. The wind shifted, a cold gust sweeping across the yard. Somewhere far off, a generator coughed to life. Soldiers shouted faintly, rebuilding the perimeter. Command's desperate, Thorne said at last. You saw how close we came to falling. Maybe the galaxy's forgotten how to fight without people like you. Lara stood, brushing frost off her gloves. Then maybe it's time they remember. She started walking again, the limp more pronounced in the uneven snow. When she reached the northern gate, a calm sergeant intercepted her, helmet still frosted from the cold, headset pressed tight against his ear. Ma'am, priority transmission from Task Force Command. They're insisting on direct contact. I'm off duty, she said. They said it's urgent, something about redeployments. She sighed quietly, then took the headset. This is Vance, she said. The voice that came through was deep, weathered, and heavy with both authority and relief. General, you've caused quite the stir. Don't call me that, she replied. There was a faint chuckle on the other end. Always modest. You saved Nightingale. Half the brass thought that base was unsalvageable. You proved them wrong. Then you should thank the ones who bled for it, she said. We will, but first we need you. There's been movement along the eastern frontier. A string of raids, organized, intelligent. We think it's the same network that hit you. We want Artemis to coordinate the response. Lara's voice went cold. Artemis is gone. You can't bury a legend, the general said. You can only keep it quiet until it's needed. Then you don't understand what legends cost. The silence that followed was long, then softly, we need you, Ella. The use of her first name made her pause. Only a few people ever used it. Her hand tightened on the headset. You need someone who can predict what comes next, not me. Find someone younger, someone who still believes they can win. We already did, the general said. They died last week. The line went dead. She stood there for a long time, staring at the static hum fading into the wind. Thorne approached from behind. You said no. I didn't say anything, she replied. He studied her for a moment. You could help them. Stop more of this before it starts. She shook her head. That's the trap, Colonel. Every war starts with someone who thinks they can end it. He looked at her, the gray hair, the calm voice, the haunted eyes, and realized something profound. She wasn't afraid of war. She was afraid of herself in it. That night the base was quiet again. The soldiers had cleaned their rifles, patched their tents, and found temporary comfort in exhaustion. Lara sat alone in the command tent, the dim light casting long shadows across the maps. The wind outside was soft now, whispering instead of howling. On the table before her lay a sealed envelope, thin, white, marked with a single insignia, the crest of the Joint Strategic Division. the same crest that had once signed her orders. She'd found it slipped under the tent flap hours earlier. No sender, no signature, just 3 words typed in block letters. The board is set. Her breath caught. It was the same phrase the general had used during the call. The same one command always used when something bigger than one battlefield was in motion. She sat back slowly, the chair creaking. Her mind was already running the angles. What kind of operation required her? What pattern did they think she could see that others could? She didn't want to care. She didn't want to open the envelope. But she did. Inside a map, hand-drawn, sparse, marked with red circles along a mountain range 300 kilometers north of Nightingale, supply routes, radio towers, civilian camps. At the bottom, a single line of text. They're building something they shouldn't. Her fingers tightened. The handwriting was familiar, clean, deliberate. She hadn't seen it in 15 years. She whispered the name before she realized it. Kellen. Her former second-in-command. Dead, or so she'd been told. She stared at the paper until the ink blurred. The war she thought she'd left was waiting for her again, patient, inevitable. Outside, the generators hummed back to life, casting a warm glow through the tent walls. She looked at the light as though it were a question she didn't know how to answer. Then she folded the map, slipped it into her pocket, and turned off the lamp. Her voice, when it came, was little more than a breath. Once more, then. Outside, the cold bit her cheeks as she stepped into the night. The stars were sharp above the peaks, the kind of clarity that only comes after a storm. Somewhere deep in the base, someone began to play a harmonica, a slow, tired tune. It drifted across the frozen air like a memory. Lara paused, listening. She had sworn she'd never fight again. But war, like the wind, always finds its way through cracks. How do you walk away from a war that still remembers your name? The next morning came sharp and colorless. The wind had died, but the air still cut like glass. Fob Nightingale was already rebuilding. Shovels scraped against ice. Radios crackled with short, efficient chatter. A supply drone buzzed low over the peaks, blinking red in the cold light. Lara Vance stood outside the mess tent, a mug of coffee cooling in her gloved hands. She hadn't slept. Her eyes followed the drone until it vanished into the horizon, a mechanical ghost carrying the first whisper of normalcy back to the world. Behind her, the base moved differently now. The soldiers she passed didn't look through her anymore. They nodded, quietly. Some saluted. Most just met her gaze and looked away again, not out of discomfort but reverence. They didn't call her ma'am anymore. They didn't need to. She sipped the bitter coffee, eyes on the ridgelines. The silence pressed close. Colonel Thorne found her there, his coat buttoned against the cold. His arm was still in a sling, his voice lower than before, stripped of every trace of the man who'd once lectured her about command. "Convoy's heading out in 2 hours," he said. "You're on it." "I'm not going back," she replied. He blinked. "You're not. Command's expecting you in Kabul." "I know." He frowned. "You're just going to stay here." She didn't answer. Her gaze was still on the horizon. Thorne stepped closer. "I saw your face when you read that message last night. The envelope. Something's happening, isn't it?" She turned her head slightly, enough to meet his eyes. "You're observant, Colonel. That's new." He ignored the jab. "You're not done. You can say it out loud, but I see it. You're preparing for something." Lara said nothing. She simply finished her coffee, set the empty mug on the crate beside her, and began walking toward the storage depot. Thorne followed. "If Command's pulling you back in, I need to know what we're walking into." She stopped at the entrance, her breath fogging in the cold. "You're not walking into anything. You're staying here, repairing your base. I'm going north." "North?" "There's an old pass 3 days out. Used to be a relay station there. Now it's just bones and silence. Someone been using it again. I'm going to find out who." Thorne looked incredulous. You're going alone. I've been alone for 15 years. That's not what I meant. I know. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You can't just vanish. You saved this base, but that doesn't make you immortal. The terrain alone could kill you. She gave a faint, tired smile. The terrain and I have an arrangement. Thorne rubbed his temples. If you're going to do this, at least take someone with you. Reyes, Harris, someone. No, she said simply. They've done enough dying for my plans. He fell silent. There was nothing left to say. When she left, she took almost nothing. A duffel with medical supplies, a shortwave transceiver, a sidearm, a folded map, and the letter marked the board as set. She didn't sign out, didn't wait for clearance. She just walked out through the northern checkpoint, her boots crunching over frozen gravel, disappearing into the white. Reyes saw her go. He didn't call out. He just raised a hand in quiet salute until she was gone from sight. For 2 days, Lara moved through the mountains, no trail, no company, just the steady rhythm of breath and snow. The silence was absolute. At night, the temperature fell to lethal. She built fires carefully, never twice in the same place. Old habits. The map she carried was a mess of old intelligence, hand-drawn topography, faded ink from another war. But she remembered the land better than any paper. The mountains hadn't changed. Only the people did. On the third morning, the clouds broke. The sun rose in a blaze of silver fire, and there, cut into the cliffside ahead, she saw it. The old relay station. A rusted sprawl of concrete and steel, half swallowed by rockfall. Once it had been a strategic outpost, early warning radar, encrypted comms, enough technology to eavesdrop on half the range. Now it looked like a tomb. Except for the smoke. Thin, gray, rising from a hidden vent near the base of the main structure. She crouched low, peering through binoculars. The snow was disturbed, boot prints recent. She felt that old hum of instinct return, the pulse she thought she'd buried with her uniform. Something's alive in there. She descended carefully, step by silent step, until she reached the rusted blast door. The hinges were frozen solid, but a faint hum came from within, the sound of a generator. She drew her sidearm, not for show, for balance. The weapon felt alien in her hand. She hadn't fired one in years. She hoped she wouldn't have to. With effort, she pried open the door enough to slip inside. The air hit her immediately, stale, metallic, warm. The interior lights flickered weakly, powered by some makeshift circuit. The hallway ahead was narrow, walls lined with peeling paint and dead terminals. She moved slowly, footsteps echoing. Halfway down the corridor, she froze. Voices, too, muffled, speaking a language she hadn't heard since the old campaigns. She recognized the cadence, clipped, tactical, confident, mercenaries. She crept closer, pressed against the cold metal, listening. Supply routes confirmed. Next strike within 48 hours. Command wants confirmation from Sector 7. Then another voice, deeper, familiar in a way that made her blood run cold. We won't wait for command. They've lost control. We move tonight. Her hand trembled slightly. She knew that voice. It couldn't be. She risked a glance around the corner. A man stood beside a flickering console, head bowed over a hollow map. His beard was streaked with gray now, but the posture, rigid, deliberate, was unmistakable. Kellen, her former second-in-command. The man she'd buried 15 years ago in Toronto Valley. Alive. She stepped back, heart pounding, breath caught between disbelief and fury. Kellen, the one who'd built her strategies into something mechanical, the one who'd believed too much in winning and not enough in why. He had been her mirror and her failure. She listened again. We take the convoy near Ashmere, Kellen was saying. Cut supply, force the withdrawal. Then we take what's left of the border garrisons. They'll fall like dominoes, and command will have no choice but to negotiate. Negotiate, the word echoed. He wasn't waging war, he was shaping one. Lara pressed a hand against the cold wall, steadying herself. 15 years and the game was still the same. Different players, same arrogance. Then one of the mercenaries said, "And if they send reinforcements, if they send her?" Kellen's voice darkened. "They won't, Artemis is gone." A pause, then quieter almost to himself. "I made sure of that." Her breath froze. The air seemed to drain from the corridor. He thought she was dead. He wanted her dead. And he was right, the part of her that once was Artemis had been buried for good reason. She closed her eyes, pressing back the surge of emotion threatening to spill through her composure. Anger, betrayal, something older. Then, with the calm of someone who'd already died once before, she stepped back into the shadows and whispered to herself. "Not yet." She turned, retracing her path silently through the corridor, out into the blinding white. By the time she reached the ridge again, the sun was dipping low, painting the peaks in blood-colored light. She stopped, breath visible, eyes locked on the outpost below. Kellen was alive. He was planning another strike. And her command, had no idea. The wind tore at her hood, but she didn't move. She stood there a long time, unmoving, her mind already building patterns, timelines, logistics. The old machine inside her was turning again, that cold, precise rhythm she tried to destroy. For the first time in years, she let it. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "All right," she murmured. "If you're playing the game again, then so am I." The mountains swallowed the sound. And with the setting sun at her back, the ghost called Artemis began to wake again. When you spend your life teaching war how to think, what happens when it starts thinking without you? By dawn, she was gone from the ridge. The storm hadn't returned, but the cold had deepened, a silence that made every breath sound like a trespass. Lara moved through it with a kind of patient precision, retracing her path until the relay outpost was a faint, smoking shadow behind her. Her hands were steady, but her thoughts were not. Kellen was alive. That single fact had rearranged the map of her mind. 15 years ago, she had watched a mountain burn to bury him, had signed reports confirming his death. But Kellen had always been good at surviving things he shouldn't. He had also been good at learning from her. And that terrified her more than any weapon. At the base of a frozen gully, she stopped to rest, the cold gnawing through her parka. She knelt, opened her duffel, and pulled out the small shortwave transceiver she'd carried from Nightingale. Its casing was dented, scratched, a relic from another life. She flicked the switch. The faint hum of static filled the air. She waited, listened, adjusted the frequency, nothing but white noise. Then softly a familiar tone like a heartbeat under the static, a coded pulse, 3 short, 2 long, 1 short. Old protocol, ghostnet. She smiled faintly, a memory surfacing, a signal she had created decades ago for communication between field operatives too valuable to risk exposure. It was supposed to have been decommissioned when she retired. Apparently, not everyone had followed the memo. She tapped a response, slow, deliberate, Artemis active. Then waited. For 5 minutes the radio hissed. Then a reply came, weak but real. "Gods don't die, they just go quiet." Her throat tightened. She knew that voice. "Tessa," she whispered. Tessa Harrow, former intelligence officer. Her last student before she left command. Sharp, defiant, unbreakable. The kind of soldier who'd once said she didn't believe in heroes, just survivors with better timing. Lara pressed the transmitter closer. "Tessa, I need eyes, North Sector, Kellen's alive." Static then, I knew it. I told them they never found the body. He's organizing strikes, supply convoys, maybe more. Location: old relay outpost, near the Khyber fractures. The silence that followed carried weight. Then, that region's dark. No active surveillance. He's off the grid. You sure you want to do this alone? Lara looked out at the snow stretching to the horizon. Alone's the only way I know how. Another pause. You're really coming back, aren't you? I never left, she said. She cut the connection. The wind rose, carrying the faint hum of the radio's dying signal, fatting like a heartbeat swallowed by the cold. 2 days later, the storm broke again, not in violence this time, but in sound. A convoy engine, tires on gravel. She was halfway down the mountain path when she saw it, a weathered supply truck painted in civilian white. No markings, no escort, but she recognized the driver's posture before she saw the face. Reyes. He braked hard when he spotted her, snow spraying from the tires. "Ma'am," he shouted over the wind, "what the hell are you doing out here?" "Following a lead," she said, walking toward the truck. "You're supposed to be in Kabul." "I missed the flight." He looked exasperated, shaking his head. "You're impossible." "And you're predictable," she said. "You followed me." "Colonel's orders," he admitted. "Said if you were going to disappear into the mountains, someone should at least pretend to keep you alive." Lara's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "I'll pretend to be grateful." He opened the passenger door. "Get in before the wind decides to eat us." She climbed in, the old duffel sliding onto the floor. Inside, the cab was freezing, but she felt something warmer, the quiet steadiness of shared danger. They drove in silence for a while, the tires crunching through drifts, engine humming like a lullaby for ghosts. Finally, Reyes said, "Thorne told me about your call. Command wants you back. You gonna do it?" "No." "Why not?" "Because they want Artemis, and Artemis doesn't leave survivors." He glanced at her. "You think this Kellen guy's that bad?" She turned her head, eyes fixed on the road. "No, Sergeant, he's worse. He's me without the conscience." They drove for another hour before reaching the edge of an abandoned village, stone huts half collapsed under snow, the kind of place history forgot. Lara motioned for Reyes to stop. "This is where we split," she said. "The hell it is," he replied. "You're not going in there alone." "I have to." "Permission to ignore that order, ma'am." She sighed, denied. He didn't move. "You'll need a spotter." "I don't take spotters." "You do now," he said simply. She looked at him for a long moment, the stubborn set of his jaw, the flicker of defiance she almost respected. Finally, she exhaled through her nose. "Fine," she said, "but if I tell you to leave, you don't argue." "Deal." They parked the truck behind a ridge and advanced on foot. The snow was knee-deep, their breath fogging in the thin air. As they neared the village outskirts, Lara crouched behind a low wall, raising her binoculars. "Heat signatures 4, maybe 5. Too disciplined for scavengers." She handed Reyes the scope. "Movement near the well. Watch that pattern, see how they don't bunch. Trained. Mercenaries or ex-special forces." He nodded. "What's the play?" She studied the layout, then pointed. "We move through the west alley, keep low. The wind's our cover, no engagement unless necessary." "Understood." They moved like shadows through the ruins, silent but not invisible. Every step crunched softly beneath the snow. The closer they got, the clearer the sound became, muffled voices, the metallic ring of equipment. Then they saw it. An uplink dish, small, portable, active, red lights blinking in rhythm. Lara's pulse quickened. "They're transmitting," she whispered. "That's how Kellen's coordinating with these." Reyes frowned. "You think there are more?" "Dozens, maybe hundreds." "What do we do?" "Collect data, then destroy it." They crept closer. Lara knelt beside the device, her fingers brushing the snow from its casing. The serial code was old but familiar, a Black Ops variant from before she retired. One of hers. Her stomach turned. "He's using my systems." Reyes blinked. "Wait, you're—" "GhostNet," she said. "The original network we built for covert relay. It was supposed to be dismantled." Reyes looked uneasy. So he's talking through your ghosts. Exactly. She opened the casing, revealing tangled circuits and a small memory core pulsing faint blue. She connected her portable interface, fingers flying over the keypad. Lines of data spilled across her wrist screen, locations, names, timestamps. Her breath caught. Dear God, she whispered. Reyes leaned closer. What is it? Convoys, hospitals, civilian camps. He's targeting everything outside military jurisdiction. Reyes's face hardened. So he's trying to make the army look like the aggressor. Not trying, she said. He's succeeding. She extracted the core, pocketed it, and pulled a small charge from her kit. She set it beside the uplink. Step back. Reyes moved behind cover. Lara triggered the detonator. A brief flash, then silence, snow drifting down to bury the scorch mark. Reyes whistled softly. That's one way to delete history. Lara's eyes stayed on the smoke. You can burn the files, you can't burn what they start. They began moving again, climbing back toward the ridge. The light was fading fast, the mountains burning red in the sunset. Halfway up, Reyes finally spoke. So what now? She stopped, breath clouding the air. Now I wake the others. The others? The ones who still remember what we were fighting for. You have a team. I have ghosts, she said. Back at the truck, she powered up the shortwave again. Her hands didn't shake this time. She tapped a new code. 3 short, 1 long, 1 short. Echo call. Minutes later, 3 voices answered. One gruff and dry, about damn time. Another distant, he's alive then. And the third soft, calm, dangerous, tell me where to aim. Lara smiled faintly. Nice to hear your voices again. You're leading this, one of them asked. No, she said, I'm finishing it. She turned to Reyes, who was watching her with a mix of disbelief and awe. Sergeant, she said quietly, welcome to the shadows. He nodded slowly. What's the mission? Lara looked out over the mountains, the fading light painting the world in crimson. To stop a man I trained, she said, before he teaches the world what I forgot. The radio crackled once more, Tessa's voice again. Artemis, say the word. Lara hesitated, the name hanging like a weight between 2 worlds, who she was and who she'd become. Then finally she exhaled, word given. The line went silent, then a series of tones, confirmation signals. Across the mountains, faint echoes of activation codes began to ripple through forgotten channels, waking old machines and older loyalties. The storm wasn't weather anymore. It was movement. And at its center, a woman who had promised never to fight again, fighting not for glory, not for command, but for forgiveness. What does victory mean when it costs the part of you worth saving? The world below the mountains was changing again. Convoys moved like veins through white silence, carrying food, medicine, soldiers, but not all of them reached their destinations. Some vanished, some burned. And every time it happened, the whispers grew. Kellen's back. The ghost of Artemis returned with him. Lara Vance listened to those whispers over encrypted comms, sitting in the back of a dim truck cabin as snow hammered the windshield. The radio glowed faint blue in the dark, a halo around her tired face. Her team, what remained of it, surrounded her. Reyes on the right, fingers drumming against his rifle. Tessa's voice on the line from somewhere east, calm but tight. 2 other operatives, unseen but close, their breathing steady. A small army of ghosts. She spread the stolen intel on the table, maps, convoy routes, intercepted messages. The lines converged on one point, the forge. A massive industrial complex buried inside a valley, officially listed as decommissioned. Kellen's new command center. He had taken her system, her network, her tactics, and built his empire out of it. Reyes leaned over the map. If this intel's right, there are at least 50 inside, maybe more. "48," Lara said quietly. "2 left this morning. Supply run to Ashmere." Reyes blinked. "How the hell do you know that?" "I taught him to rotate guards every 36 hours. He hasn't changed the rhythm." Reyes let out a low whistle. "You really did build him." Lara didn't reply. She was staring at the map as if trying to read something behind it, the space between decisions, the invisible logic of war. Finally she spoke. "We're not taking it by force." Tessa's voice crackled through the radio. "Then how?" "By memory," Lara said. "He thinks I'm dead. That's my advantage. He'll never expect a ghost to knock on his door." "You're going in alone again," Tessa said flatly. "Yes." Reyes snapped his head toward her. "Absolutely not." "Sergeant." "Do sergeant me. You said it yourself, he's you without restraint. You walk in there, he'll finish what he started." Lara looked at him, her expression calm but unreadable. "Maybe that's what needs to happen." He stared at her, stunned. "You can't mean that." She stood, folding the map. "If I kill him, someone else takes his place. If I die, maybe the myth dies with me. Maybe Artemis finally stops haunting people." Reyes clenched his fists. "That's not justice, that's surrender." Lara slipped on her gloves. "No, Sergeant, that's balance." Night fell heavy over the forge. The valley was a jagged wound in the earth, ringed by floodlights and fences. Drones drifted lazily above, their red eyes blinking like watchful stars. Lara moved through the shadows, wrapped in cold and silence. Every step brought back echoes, training drills, debriefs, orders shouted into storm winds. She remembered the first time she and Kellen had built this system. 2 officers drunk on the illusion of control, convinced they could make war predictable. They'd called it the algorithm of survival. It had saved millions, then it had killed millions more. She slipped past a guard post, disabling a sensor with one flick of her wrist tool. The entrance loomed ahead, a blast door marked with the same crest that had once adorned her command reports. The crest of Artemis Division. She touched it lightly, then pushed the door open. Inside, warmth, light, the hum of machinery. The air smelled of oil and ozone. Rows of terminals glowed against concrete walls, each displaying a different map. Movement markers, convoy patterns, casualty estimates. And at the center, Kellen. Older, sharper, a scar across his cheek, a pistol at his hip. He was alone, standing before a massive hollow map that painted his face in ghostlight. He didn't turn when he spoke. "You shouldn't exist." His voice hadn't changed, calm, measured, cold. Lara stepped into the light. "You say that like it's the first time you've been wrong." He turned slowly. When his eyes met hers, something flickered: shock, disbelief, maybe regret. Then nothing, just calculation. "I buried you," he said. "You tried." He studied her face for a long time. "You look old." Is what happens when you survive the lessons you should have died learning." Kellen's lips twitched, still poetic, still pretending there's morality in mathematics. She took a slow step forward. "You're targeting civilians." "I'm targeting leverage," he corrected. "You taught me that survival requires sacrifice. You just never had the stomach to admit it." "That's not strategy," she said. "That's surrender disguised as logic." He tilted his head. "You think command ever cared about morality? You think your restraint saved anyone? You trained me to see patterns. I just stopped pretending they meant anything." She let the silence stretch. Then softly, "What did they promise you?" "Freedom," he said. "From the old rules, from their hypocrisy. You call it war, I call it design." She felt it then, the ache of recognition, the terrible familiarity of his words. He wasn't just echoing her teachings, he was completing them. "I made you better," she said quietly, "not crueler." He smiled faintly. "You made me inevitable." He turned back to the map, gesturing at the digital chaos before him. "This is what they fear, Lara. A war that doesn't need them anymore. one that can sustain itself, balanced, eternal. Eternal war, she said. You think that's peace? It's stability, he said. She stepped closer. No, Kellen, it's decay. He turned, drawing his pistol in one smooth motion. You always did love speeches. She didn't move. Her voice stayed calm. If you wanted me dead, you'd have shot already. He hesitated, just for a moment. And in that moment, she saw it, the crack in his certainty. The memory of the soldier who had once stood beside her, terrified but loyal. I didn't come here to kill you, she said. I came here to end this. You can't. I can, she said softly, raising her hand and showing him the data core, the one she'd pulled from the uplink in the village. I have your network. Kellen's eyes flicked toward it. You wouldn't. I already did, she said. The signal's live. One word from me and every transmission collapses. Every ghostnet node you've built goes dark. He stepped closer. You'd erase your own creation. Her voice was steady. It was never meant to be a weapon. He laughed, not cruelly but almost sadly. You still don't get it, do you? You were the weapon. Lara looked at him for a long, silent second. Then softly, not anymore. Her thumb pressed the detonator. For a heartbeat the base went dark. Then the lights flickered and died. The hum of the machines faded into silence. Every screen went blank. Kellen stared at the dead terminals, disbelief in his eyes. You. It's over, she said. He took a step toward her. You destroyed everything. She nodded. Good. He looked almost lost. They'll come for us both. They always do. He stared at her, the woman who'd built him, undone him, and somehow forgiven both. Then, with a bitter half-smile, he lowered his weapon. You win. She shook her head. No, Kellen, no one wins when we're both still standing. He exhaled, closed his eyes, and sat heavily against the table. For a long time they said nothing. Only the wind howled outside, sifting through the cracks of the dying base. Finally he spoke, voice quieter than before. You could have killed me. I did, she said, 15 years ago. He gave a dry laugh. So what now? Now, she said, turning toward the door, you live with what you built. By dawn, the forge was silent. The servers were gone, the signals were dead. The war, for now, had lost its architect. Lara walked out into the snow, the cold light catching her face. Reyes was waiting near the ridge, scanning the horizon anxiously. When he saw her, relief softened his posture. Ma'am, he said, voice cracking, you're still here, she said. He looked past her at the smoking valley. Did you stop him? She thought about that for a long time. No, I reminded him he could stop himself. Reyes frowned. That's not much of a guarantee. It's more than most wars get. They stood there in silence as the wind swept across the valley. Snow fell softly, covering the scars of another conflict. Tessa's voice came faintly over the radio. Command, asking for a debrief. Lara looked up at the brightening sky. Tell them this was never about winning. It was about remembering what we lose when we try. Copy that, Tessa said quietly. Reyes turned to her. What will you do now? She smiled faintly. What I was sent to do in the first place, count crates. He laughed under his breath. You really hate being a legend, don't you? She started walking, boots crunching over snow. Legends don't grow old, Sergeant. People do. As they moved down the ridge, the light spread slowly across the peaks, soft, golden, almost kind. The world looked untouched again, as if it hadn't just witnessed another near ending. Lara paused, glancing back one last time. The forge was already disappearing under a blanket of white. Soon there'd be no trace of it. And maybe that was right. Her voice when she spoke was quiet but clear, like the last line of a prayer. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She turned, disappearing into the snow. And the mountains, silent, patient, kept her secret.